Hi people, it's Archivist here, and today thank you very much for joining me to talk while we watch some Crash Team Racing online gameplay. I was going to do this video in one of two ways. The first way was to essentially do it a bit like a live stream where I would just play the game and talk. However, I very quickly realised that that was an ill-conceived idea, as I could not concentrate on playing and talking very well. I can barely concentrate on talking as it is. So I decided not to do that, instead just to do an after the fact discussion. And I didn't just want to do this about the gameplay because I'm already creating a bunch of commentaries for the nitrous oxide time trials, which I'm creating for some of the tracks where I've beaten him on. So instead I just wanted to do this a bit like a general podcast type talk to do with things sort of directly or semi-related to Crash Team Racing Nitro-Fueled. And I thought an interesting place to start was first of all how online really does impact the longevity of games like this. Especially with this being a PlayStation 1 remaster, remake, reimagining, what have you. There's this sense that this game was born in a simpler time, and so losing that with concepts such as online integration, matchmaking, and the pit stop is almost a little bit sacrilegious to what old school gaming was about. So back in the day, it was very much a case of you went down to Game or GameStop in America, and you would get the game, put it into your console, and you would play it. If there were bugs in there, if there were exploits, that's what the game was. And maybe the publisher or developer would re-release the game, but you'd have to go out and buy the re-released version. The game had to be finished and done and working for the consumer. However, now games are ever evolving. I mean, Crash Team Racing has been patched already several times for improving stability, preventing this save corruption bug, and also eliminating shortcuts that people have found. And right there is a big change between the original and this one. In the original CTR, as I've had to go back and learn, as I admit I did not play the game originally, I never owned PlayStation 1, I got on to gaming with a PlayStation 2, but I went back and looked at the original one and I found all these videos showing off these crazy exploitative shortcuts that were clearly not designed to be in the game, but that just became part of it. So people who would speedrun the game would make use of these shortcuts because that's what the game was. However, now in this ever-evolving world, shortcuts such as there was this one on Papu's Pyramid where you could skip a massive portion of the track, got patched out because, of course, for online play where balance is key, that had no place. The developers didn't want you to skip out most of the track because that would make races on that map very boring if everyone just used that particular shortcut. And I suppose there's two ways to look at that. On the one hand, it means that the game is more fair, it is more balanced, but on the other, I know that some people do enjoy that old school thing where the game is as it is and it will always be in that state, and if there is an exploit in it, well, that's just another element for the speedrunners to master. That's just another aspect of the gameplay, and that is something that is lost. And I have to admit, although I appreciate the charm that would have come with being able to take advantage of those exploits, on the other hand, it wouldn't have been particularly fun online. There would have been like 2% of people who could manage it, and everyone else would be, not enjoying it as a result. And that's another thing about online in general, right? Particularly in racing games like this, and I found something similar with Mario Kart, where you have to change your mindset a little bit if you want to enjoy the online. So in a game like Call of Duty, for example, for me, if I win, I'm happy. If I lose, I'm a little bit unhappy, right? There's victory and there's failure. It's just one or the other. Obviously, don't let it upset you too much, but it's just one of those things. You want to be the winning team. Or in a free-for-all, you want to be the winner. But in this, because there are 8 players in the race, to actually come first, to actually win, is quite a considerable feat. And unless you are a very good player, you shouldn't necessarily be expecting yourself to win every single time. If you can, amazing. But chances are, even if you are very good, an item like a clock or a blue orb will knock you down. So the way I've tried to the way I've tried to get into the online and to conceive of I won this versus I lost. Initially, it was the way that Mario Kart worked. So the way Mario Kart seemed to work was your character would cheer if you came in the upper half, so you were in the winners group. But if you came in the bottom half of players or finishers, so like 7 to 12, then your character would look sad. So it meant that you'd lost. So for me in Mario Kart 8 Online, I felt like I'd basically had a good game if I came in the top half, and a bad game if I came in the bottom half. Now, annoyingly in Crash Team Racing, if you come anything less than first, I think, you get the sad music when you pass the finishing lines because you didn't win, which means that the vast majority of the lobby have lost, right? And only one person actually won. So the way I've tried to frame it, for me at least, is that if I come, again, basically 4th place or up, I'm happy. If I come lower than that, a little bit disappointed, feel like I could have done better. But then again, there are some tracks where I can be playing perfectly fine, but then just a clock when I come up to a ramp can cause me to fly off at just the wrong time. I get recovered by Aku, and then as I'm recovering I get hit by missiles and bombs, and then before I know it I'm back in 8th place. And maybe I can recover a little bit, maybe I can get back up the ranks, use some of those more powerful items, but chances are I won't get back to first. Sometimes that does happen, and that is like the best feeling ever, when you've been absolutely battered backwards and then even still you manage to come into first place. But yeah, that's for a player like myself who is maybe average, that's quite rare. It doesn't happen too often. Another thing about online that I have to say does keep me coming back, even though I know that it's been specifically engineered to do that, so I am knowingly, if you're going along with the manipulation, is how Wumpa coins work. So I noticed quite quickly that the way Wumpa coins work, number one, is that you'll get more by going online, like a hell of a lot more. And then also you get more if it's the weekend. I think there's a 2 times multiplier, right? But then if you play enough races one after the other, then your Wumpa coin multiplier will diminish, and eventually you're basically just getting as many Wumpa coins as you would get from an offline mode. Which means the game is sort of saying to you that after a certain number of races, you should stop and come back tomorrow. So if you're looking at something that looks really fantastic in the pit stop, and even if you were winning race after race, eventually you do hit those diminishing returns, essentially is what they are. And then it's like, well, I could keep racing, I will still be earning coins, but it's so much lower than I was getting that maybe I should just take a break now, do something else, and come back tomorrow. And I suppose in some ways there is a benefit to that, because it stops you from just sitting in front of the PlayStation or the Switch or the Xbox or whatever and just spending your entire day playing the game, which I will admit at the weekend I sometimes do want to do, but it's not necessarily that healthy. So if you want to be devil's advocate on it, it does mean that it sort of encourages you to play in healthy sessions rather than in these marathons. But on the other, it does feel a bit like, well, if I want to spend all day playing it, let's say Saturday is the only day in the week that I have to play Crash Team Racing, then I may want to spend the whole day doing it, because I know that the rest of the week I actually can't do it. That was just my lifestyle was like that, and that is the case for lots of people. But you can't do that, because after a certain amount of time it will hit the diminishing returns. And so players who have a life setup where, let's say, they can only play at the weekends or again on a particular day, they are getting a really raw end of the deal here. And it's really only favouring players who can keep coming back to it every day for shorter bursts. And I suppose they've worked out that that is the best way to do it, and it's eerily reminiscent of the way that a lot of mobile games work. And I'm slightly concerned that, because the thing is, I've still got this underlying thought that they're going to implement microtransactions. And in my full review, I did say that I thought that would be likely to do with essentially buying the cosmetics they have in the pit stop. But there's a part of me that's a little worried that they might start doing that for Wumpa coin multipliers as well. So if you're playing at the weekend and your multipliers run out, you can effectively pay a little bit of money and then you get it back. And that would reflect the kind of energy systems we see in a lot of mobile games. So it's hard not to imagine that kind of thing happening, because when I see the way they are handling the online in this, it's really tricky not to think of a lot of mobile games I've played and think, that's the same tactic I saw there, minus the microtransactions. So are they just looking to slot that in? And that's sort of my biggest worry for this game, because, I mean, you can probably tell by the coverage, but I am really enjoying Crash Team Racing Nitro-Fueled. I just feel like the gameplay, the way it looks, it all just resonates with me so heavily. And I say this as someone who did not play the original, someone who is seeing this for the first time with new eyes, with fresh eyes. I didn't even play Crash Nitro Kart, even though I did own a PS2. So this whole gameplay style is entirely fresh to me, and I'm really enjoying it. I mean, it's a truly timeless style if it was genuinely like this back in the day. It's incredibly impressive that Naughty Dog was able to fashion such an addictive gameplay loop with such well-refined tracks, and it's really nice that Beanox with Twilight Tour have managed to continue that. So I suppose on that note, something that's been coming up a bit is where we are with remakes. So with the Insane Trilogy and Spyro and now this, these are all fantastic remakes. Everyone loves them. They look great. They have been completely built from the ground up, but they capture the spirit of the original source material, which is fantastic, and they often incorporate multiple games. So the Insane Trilogy had, of course, 3 games in it. Same with Spyro, and now with this we have 2 games plus just completely new content that's going to be coming on the way. So, and also something I should mention is that they're all coming out for reduced prices, which I suppose they're doing because they are not completely new games. Maybe they feel like they have to put a reduced price for that reason, but I've got to say, I get more time spent on these games than I do some brand new ones, without a shadow of a doubt. So these remakes are also representing fantastic value for money, given the amount of time I spend on them, which is why, as I mentioned in my review, they do implement microtransactions into Crash Team Racing. I would be remiss not to offset that against the fact that the game was actually quite cheap just from the base. But yeah, so I digress. My main point being that these have been very successful remakes. But now, do we want to continue these franchises, but with new ideas, new gameplay styles, maybe similar gameplay styles, but new levels? Or do we just want to continuously get remakes? And I have to say, I'm now more on the side of new games. Clearly, these new developers understand what made these old games work. So I think it would be fair for them to create something entirely new now. Something that, of course, takes the source material and does it justice. So being careful not to change character designs too radically, for example, or to completely overhaul the old gameplay styles and do something like Crash of the Titans, where it became more of a beat 'em up than it was a platformer. But as long as they don't do anything like that, don't do anything too radical, I see no reason that they can't do entirely new games, and I would really enjoy that. I would see it as a fantastic continuation of these older franchises. But other people, I've noticed, want these remakes to continue to be made. So I think one I'm hearing a lot is this game called Crash Bash, which I went back, because again, did not play this game, and I looked at what it was about, and it seemed to be a Mario Party-like game where you had lots of mini-games of the various characters, and this was also a game not developed by Naughty Dog, so the people who made the original Crash games so good. So it's a little bit of an odd one. It feels like it's only qualifying for a remake in so much in that it was on the PlayStation 1. But I have to be honest, I don't see that as being a game that will hold up and is even worth remaking at all. I know this is going to be something that's going to be really mixed. I'm sure there are some older gamers who must have incredibly fond memories of this game, but I'm just looking at it and thinking, I don't want this remade at the expense of something new being made. I mean, that's something we have to consider as well. We often think, is a developer remaking a game coming at the expense of a new experience? If it's not, and if it doesn't really matter if a remake is made or not, then fine, make a Crash Bash remake. It doesn't matter because it was going to be made anyway. I don't really care too much. But if it means that the developer assigned to that could have been making the newest Crash game or the newest Spyro game, then I would see that as a little bit of a travesty, to be honest with you. I really wouldn't like the idea of some Mario Party-like game being remade at the expense of something new just because people want to continue this remake train that's going on. Maybe it's a game you had to play to really appreciate Crash Bash, but I'm even listening to some reviews and I'm not hearing it as being something particularly great. So I would like it now if some of these very talented developers doing these remakes were able to focus their efforts on creating new experiences that just basically maintain the spirit of the original games and don't try to do anything too radical. Eventually they'll have to, because they'll be in the positions that the original games were, where the whole reason that they started to change was because people got tired of the formula. My first game that I played in the Crash series was a game called Crash Wrath of Cortex, which was on the PlayStation 2. When I played it, I loved it. I thought it was a fantastic platformer. I thought it had a lot of charm, and I really loved the characters and the environments, and I thought Crunch was a really good villain. But a lot of people at the time, having to look back retrospectively, said that it was simply a boring, uninspired continuation of the Naughty Dog series. Obviously, not having played them back then, I didn't have that disadvantage, but that led to the game Twin Sanity coming out, which was very different, which was more open and had the gimmick of working with Dr. Neo Cortex to solve puzzles and defeat enemies, etc. So eventually there will have to be an evolution of gameplay, because they can't just continue this style indefinitely, because nostalgia is one thing, but if you just keep making games in this traditional Crash style or traditional driving style, it will eventually get tired again, and you'll essentially be doing a cycle of reviving the series, people going, oh, I love this, I miss it, but then you burn it out, people get bored of it, and then they leave it for another decade or 5 years, and then it gets remade again, and people once again say, wow, look at this, I can't believe it's amazing, this is my childhood. And it's just this nostalgia cycle where a series gets reborn, people love it, dies, comes back again, and it's this cycle of nostalgia. I don't really want us to get into that, and the only way that you can avoid that is to do essentially what Nintendo have done with Mario, where although the core concept of platforming has been a through line of the entire Mario franchise, it has been a series that has continued to innovate and evolve and do new things. I mean, look at the 3D Marios, for example. You've got the original Mario 64, which was a bold leap into the 3D world. Then you've got Mario Sunshine, which brought, well, a massive graphical leap for one thing, but also the concept of Flood, where you were cleaning up ooze, which, now that I say it, it sounds really unfun, but I love Mario Sunshine. And then there was Mario Galaxy, which had far more focus levels, was very different to the sort of sandbox environments of Sunshine and before 64. They did then create Mario Galaxy 2, but fair enough, it was a very popular game. And then we had Mario 3D World for the Wii U, I think. I didn't play that game, but it looked to be essentially trying to take 2D concepts and put them directly into 3D. And then the absolutely fantastic, wonderful Mario Odyssey, which went back to the style of Sunshine of 64, but brought in Cappy so that you could do captures. So the way that Mario has survived so long and has, continually got this praise was by, yes, holding on to the character designs of old, so that people can always say that's Mario, that's Bowser, that's Peach, etc. But by bringing in these new gameplay concepts, and that's sort of what I feel like Crash would need to do. So maybe it would be appropriate to have one new original Crash game done in the original Crash style with some different vehicles, something like Warped. But then I think after that, you want to go maybe open world or sandbox environment, something like Mario Odyssey, where you've got far more freedom of movement, and just kind of keep going from there until you're making these epic, massive scale platformers that have never been seen before, and Crash becomes this new staple of the modern era. So I don't think it should stagnate. I think they should continue to evolve the gameplay, but I think things to keep the same are the main concept of platforming and kart racing, because I feel like kart racing, well, as you can see here and as you can hear, clearly fit Crash very well. But I think just from recognising the mistakes of the past, if you're continuing a series, keep things like the overall theme and character designs consistent. again, look at Mario. They don't really change the designs of those. Mario, since Sunshine, has more or less looked the same. Bowser, again, since Sunshine, has looked the same. Since they were able to have these properly realised 3D models, has looked the same. Some refinements, sometimes a bit more cartoony, sometimes a bit more realistic in things like Super Smash Brothers, but essentially the same recognisable character. If I look at some of these mascots that they tried to revive and they tried to redesign them, things like Crash himself and Crash of the Titans, and also I think one of the most infamous ones being in the Sonic series with Sonic Boom, where they decided to make him taller and look like an Uncharted character. Things like that, generally not favoured by the fans. People like a really classic looking design, but just taking that into newer worlds. You need to have a familiar anchor in order to make everything else more acceptable as you change it, and usually the designs and the themes are the best way to do that. I mean, I suppose if I really want to tempt myself, do I want a remake of something like Crash Tag Team Racing? This is a game that I really loved when I was younger, but I have a feeling that the Crash Tag Team Racing, that's a game that was good mostly because I was quite young and couldn't see its flaws, like the fact that you could merge with other carts and then just start blowing up all the other carts very easily, and then you could just demerge at the end and win. It was a bit of a flawed game. That I think the reason I really loved that game was because there was a time where I was really obsessed with games that let you walk around in a world but also drive around. So things like Simpsons Hit and Run, when I played that, I thought was so groundbreaking in the fact that I could go in and out of a car, and therefore the same thing with Crash Tag Team Racing. The fact that you were sometimes in a car and sometimes platforming was inherently amazing, but now of course that's not amazing at all. That's quite standard. I should point out that I did not play Grand Theft Auto when I was younger. It was funny, I wasn't allowed to play it because of the swearing, unfortunately. So if I did play it, I was made to play it with the sound off. God, that's really sad. But I did end up eventually getting into it. Now I love it. But yeah, sorry. Back to the point. So remakes, maybe one or two more, but I would not like the idea of it going on indefinitely, because otherwise we're just trapped in this indefinite revival. I mean, nostalgia is this really, really strong emotion that can, for example, take someone who's a little bit older, a little bit jaded, not really enjoying the world anymore, and pull them back to their childhood, a simpler time when they did enjoy things. Things were new and amazing. So you can invoke people's emotions in a way that few other things can. So nostalgia is a really tempting thing to pull on, but at a certain point you need to introduce some originality, otherwise you do risk stagnation. I also have to admit, this is a thing, this is kind of jumping to another topic now, but it's something that these remakes are really making me appreciate are this style of graphics, and some people describe it as the Pixar look, where effectively, although we now have the graphical horsepower in our consoles to create very realistic, believable worlds, developers have started to realise that you can also make these cartoony worlds, but make them so refined and bright and colourful and well realised that, okay, they're not realistic, but they are a pleasure to behold. And because they are cartoony, you know that they're going to hold up for far longer than games that are attempting to be realistic. Even something like, say, Uncharted 4, that still looks absolutely mind-blowing by today's standards, but jump a decade forward or even 20 years and the game will look dated, which is really hard to believe, but it will look dated if we look at the way history has progressed. But with a game like this, eventually it will start to show its age, as does the original Crash Team Racing now. That's an unmistakably old title. But because it's cartoony, I don't believe this game will ever look ugly. I really just appreciate the fantastic, vibrant colours you can see. One thing I will say is that I'm disappointed we don't yet, as of me making this video, maybe in the future they will have it, but we don't currently have a PC version of the game. And of course, the advantages of a PC version is that you can go up to 4K resolution, whereas according to Digital Foundry, the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X versions only go up to 1440p. Particularly surprised there, I have to say, on the Xbox One X side. I'm sure they could have got 4K out of that. That's a real surprise, particularly when you consider that the recent Sonic kart racing title aims for 60 FPS on Xbox One X, but is also full 4K. So how did they not manage 4K here? Maybe it's some of the graphical techniques they're using, like ambient occlusion, are just so demanding that they do have to make a sacrifice on resolution. But again, going back to the point I was making with the PC version, you can crank it up to absolute maximum and get the best possible visuals out of it. I don't have an OLED TV or an OLED monitor to play this game on, but I think this game would just look absolutely gorgeous. I truly envy you if you have an OLED screen to play this game on, because of all the bright colours once again. Something like Coco Park must look absolutely gorgeous on an OLED screen. The best thing I can do is watch some footage of the game on my iPhone, which has an OLED screen, but that's something that I should invest in an OLED screen at some point, because games like this will really show it off. Especially, also, you know, the flames as they come out the back of the cart must look absolutely fantastic. Bright red must be great. So I am really enjoying these sorts of visuals. I really hope we get more games like this. I think the first time I saw a game do this with the current generation of hardware and just thought, wow, that is impressive, was the 2016 version of Ratchet and Clank, where it was a bit like a remake of the original Ratchet and Clank to coincide with the movie release. I tried to watch that film, by the way, I just could not get into it. I think it was just aimed at a younger audience. It's fine, it's a cartoon, right? But yeah, the game was pretty damn good looking and also very fun. But the one thing that has come at the expense of these fantastic visuals, at least again on current gen hardware, is that there is not even a 60 frames per second option. But where they've managed to get the 30 frames per second so consistent and so reliable with a really good implementation of motion blur, I am tempted to forgive that very slight shortcoming. I mean, I do love 60 FPS games, and to be fair, when I came away from this and started playing Black Ops 4, I did immediately notice, oh wow, this is a very noticeable difference. But I think, very importantly, it doesn't feel like that's incurring too much of a control latency, which would have been a problem for this game. It's like if I think of something like Red Dead Redemption 2, as much as I love it, has really noticeable input lag. And if the 30 FPS had resulted in latency that would have incurred input lag, then yeah, this wouldn't have been doable. But I suppose they knew it was a safe thing to do, because the original Crash Team Racing was also targeting 30 FPS, as I understand it. I'm not sure how consistent it was. If you played the original, feel free to let me know. So I think I'm going to end this here. We're coming up to just about half an hour, just a little bit under. Hope you enjoyed this video. It'll be interesting to know what people think of it. I don't often do this long form type of video, but something to try. And yeah, as always people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.